Hi, everyone. Welcome to Service and Sacrifice. This is Justin.
And I'm Anthony, and we're going to be talking about some VA topics today.
Yeah, so I wrote an article and I titled it Doge Guts Veteran Affairs. And this is related to tons of press that I'm sure you've seen where 80,000 veterans are going to be losing their jobs due to the new administration. So if you see my eyes going all over the place, I'm just reading my notes so I don't accidentally say something incorrect and piss people off. But I figure we'll get into it. So Anthony, you wanna lead us off with some talking points?
Yeah, sure. So I think the first one that's probably the most jarring is that 80,000 number. 80,000 workers of the VA were laid off. Now a lot of them were probationary workers that, based on one of the releases that was talking about this, it's a merit-based thing. So none of these people were necessarily guaranteed that they would have jobs, but still, that's a big number of people to suddenly disappear from, an agency that is needed and that helps many of us and viewers who will be watching this channel.
Yeah, so right now the plan is, Trump announced it I think 2 months ago, in a greater efficiency impact to the federal government. So the plan is 80,000 get laid off by August. They've already done some rounds of that. Some of the interesting aspects are, it's I don't want to say it's being reversed, but I have read some articles in the past couple days where, for example, a federal judge in California was able to somehow reverse a few thousand of the people who were originally impacted. Now, I don't know how that works, where a judge can reverse what the president does. I didn't even want to look into it because it just sounds, I don't want to get into the legal aspect of it, but I don't think at the end of this, it's going to be a full 80,000, but I know that a lot of veterans were upset just seeing that initial number.
Well, and something that's part of this too that, we need to take into account is that when the PACT Act came out, and for anyone who doesn't know what the PACT Act is, it was something that was signed into law to address certain health issues that people may have that came from exposure to toxic chemicals or waste. And there was a special notification that went out, I believe it was close to 2 years ago, basically saying, hey, if you were in any of these places and any of these things happen to you, you need to, file a claim with the VA so that you can be compensated and we can get you health care. That was another big piece of it, is VA health care was now included. If you qualified for what the PACT Act was, you would get free VA medical care. So when that happened, there was a big ramp up in hiring for the VA to support all of the new claims and new veterans coming in that were going to be using VA healthcare. And I believe that number was, 61,000 new employees in just 2023.
Yeah, so it's interesting. When I first heard about the PACT Act, I've been going to the VA for probably, 4 years. I've been out for 12. 8 of those years, I didn't want to look into even how to get signed up with VA. I was like, I'm just going to go to my job's insurance, right? Because my thought process was, being young at 22 and just getting out, I was like, the Army didn't really take care of me. And the medical staff were not the best, despite what some people's experiences. So I automatically assumed, I was like, the VA is probably not that great either. And depending who you talk to, you might hear a different story. But I remember being a kid and watching war movies. I feel like one of the most popular scenes in all war movies is when they're doing burn pits in Iraq or something. And there's just that big tub where they put everybody's shit and then they burn it. I remember being 10 and being that can't be good to breathe in, right? So if I was a child thinking this, how was the PACT Act just signed into law in 2022? How has this not been a thing forever?
Well, it's interesting too, because I know someone personally through one of my friends. His dad was in the Vietnam War and was exposed to Agent Orange and has been dealing with all kinds of health issues for years and years. And I've heard a lot of different incidents that have happened with him. And the VA has basically been like, I don't know, man, like we can't do anything about that. So when this came out, that's the first thing that popped into my head. I'm like, oh, wow. So maybe we're going to see some actual help for people who were exposed to toxic chemicals or really dangerous chemicals and the health effects that they're dealing with as a result of it.
Yeah, I immediately thought of Agent Orange because Vietnam veterans are one of the groups that just historically like do not get help for their service. And like they were dropping Agent Orange back then, and then like having US soldiers just walk through it, like it was absurd. But yeah, so in 2023 under Biden, over 60,000 new workers were hired. And I'm not sure if you noticed something. I used 6 articles to write my report. Usually I like to use different sites. Like, for example, I think 5 of the 6 were Stars and Stripes news outlet. I usually don't like to do just one, just to keep it diverse, but I did use 3 different authors. And I don't know if you noticed, but almost every single quote I got from a concerned politician was a Democrat. Did you notice the D by all the quotes?
I did notice that. And that immediately makes me, regardless of my own political affiliation, it makes me want to go and dig deeper and get some of the answers to these questions from a couple different sources, because, you know, there's a statement here from Senator Richard Blumenthal from Connecticut, and his quote that was in one of these articles said that these layoffs will starve the VA's ability to meet increased demand in order to justify the privatizing of Veterans Affairs. Now, just that statement alone at the beginning, starve the VA's ability, the alarms go off, right? But then the rest of that statement is kind of confusing in a way. That makes me want to go and look into this and go, okay, these people that were laid off, what were they actually doing?
Yeah, and that's one thing I couldn't find, and I'm sure they didn't release that information. I'm sure for multiple reasons. One, the VA probably didn't want to release that information because there's probably a large majority of people that aren't super essential. You know, not saying certain positions at the VA are less essential than others. It all makes the wheel go round. But like, if they were cutting 75% of the claims department and crisis line department, then that would be super concerning, opposed to, you know, weekend third shift security guards. I don't know. But yeah, so Blumenthal is in Connecticut, and Connecticut's where I go to the VA and live. So it's interesting to hear him talk about that. The VA probably doesn't want to, due to lack of how significant all these employees are. And I'm sure the Trump administration doesn't want to release that information, because what if there are a lot of significant positions being cut? What is your opinion on that?
I mean, like you said, it can be either way. So I feel like right now we have some information, but not necessarily all of the information. I would be interested to see over the next, 6 months or so, if the average processing time for claims, for example, increases drastically, or if there's suddenly a huge backlog in, medical appointments or medical care. That would tell us, without having the information released, whether these people were actually frontline, absolutely necessary. That's how I look at it. If we see a negative effect, that's how we would know, regardless of whether an agency releases the specific details or not.
Yeah, and I'm sure that the majority of quotes from leaders in the Democratic Party just have to do with the right is undoing part of what the left did, not to make it super political. But Trump's administration did state that they want to heavily focus on privatizing the VA, which I know sounds scary when people think privatizing it, but really it's just an expansion on the Mission Act. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not, no.
All right, so the Mission Act is really just privatized care within the VA that they came up with, I think, a few years ago. And basically what it is it says it on the website, the specific verbiage that I'm going to butcher, but essentially if your wait time is too long, or you feel like your healthcare will be negatively impacted due to the speed at which you'll be seen, you can request to go to a private doctor that's within the VA's like network of helping partners. So for example, I wanted to see an ENT because I had a deviated septum, and I called the VA and I was like, hey, I would like to go see the specialist. I know for a fact my septum is deviated. And of course, you have to go through the same insurance procedures. You can't just like go to a specialist, right? You got to go to your primary. They have to refer you. I went to see my primary fairly quick. You can usually see them within a few weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, I'd say, which is pretty acceptable. And then they were like, okay, the ENT is going to be, I think, 9 months to go get the initial appointment. And keep in mind, the initial appointment was at the other facility on the other side of the state because they don't have specialists, at least here in Connecticut, at both facilities. So like if you need an MRI done, if you need to see ENT, if you need to see pulmonologist, which is for breathing and lungs, you have to go to the West Haven campus, which is an hour away. Not the biggest deal, right? You can drive an hour away for free healthcare, but that's 2 hours every time you do this. It adds up, right? So then you have to factor in waiting there. Then you have to factor in the appointment, or you're looking at half a day for this appointment. And most jobs make you take PTO when you have a 4-hour appointment. So I was like, hey, I'm not waiting 9 months because then that's just for him to say, oh yeah, your septum's deviated. We should do surgery. And then there would be like another 4 to 6 months for the surgery. Whereas I requested to use the Mission Act, I saw an ENT 20 minutes away from my house, like 3 months later, still for free. VA covers it. In my opinion, it's way better.
And that's even pretty quick as far as private medical is concerned. One of my friends recently had the same thing done for the same reason. And he's a Marine veteran, but he doesn't use the VA for anything. He doesn't have a disability rating. He's one of those people that's kind of against all that stuff. And he used his private medical, and it took him about 5 months. The overall result was still better for you than just straight private medical.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to depend where your state is, but like Connecticut is the third smallest state. Rhode Island, this will bring up some topics that we're going to talk about later with like rural veterans and accessibility to healthcare, especially specialists. But if I live in the third smallest state and it still takes 2 hours for me to commute, which yes, you can get your gas money reimbursed through some programs. And yes, you can request like some kind of ride sharing service where they pick you up. It's not about the money or that. It's just 2 hours is a long time just to go for a 15-minute appointment where they look up your nose, right? So like I try to request Mission Act care whenever I need something specialized because it just takes forever. So that's essentially what they want to do. They want to put more emphasis on you seeing staff outside of the VA, which I know is bad for obviously VA employees because if there's less work, then you need less people, potentials for layoffs like we're seeing now. But I got to tell you, man, the VA has a lot of flaws for having a $370 billion budget.
Yeah, I feel like I remember reading a quote from someone, I think it was at the end of your article, where somebody basically said, we're not going to be paying people to put together slideshows. And that, ties into the next thing here. The secretary of the VA said that this effort would lead to savings of $83 million, which is part of the larger reduction that the government is working on right now. We'll just have to see before we know for sure what the real impact will be based on these layoffs.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too, right? So the VA would essentially be saving roughly $83 million, part of Trump's total $2 billion in government reduction. I'm not saying $2 billion is not a lot of money, right? And yes, when you add up everything he's trying to reduce, $2 billion here, all the agencies that he's essentially shrinking, which everyone has a different opinion on that. But when you look at the VA, right, 83 million is not a lot of money, at least not to the government, right? Like I feel like over the past 4 years, how many, I feel like countlessly, I opened my phone and I'd get articles of us sending $100 million, $175 million like every week to some random country that has no impact on America, like essentially humanitarian donations, which is great. That's fantastic. But how many veterans are going to the VA not getting helped? And it has nothing to do with, I mean, a lot of these veterans can't go to privatized healthcare. Like they don't make enough money. They're retired and don't have a job anymore. So they can't afford like Cobra, or they're just like disabled, and the amount of co-pays and extra money they would have to pay for all their specialized care would bankrupt them. So they're forced to go to the VA. The VA can still barely assist them, even with these 60,000 new workers. And, it's just, $3 million just isn't that much money.
Yeah, it kind of makes you wonder, maybe it would have been better to repurpose these employees. I'm just curious what the criteria was that was used to make the determination that these people should be let go. If it was solely based on, okay, the last in, first out theory, you started the latest out of everyone, so you're going to be the first to go. That doesn't seem like a very efficient way to reduce force and save cost.
Yeah, so I mentioned in the article, the majority of these veterans being let go are probationary workers, or they're considered competitive service staff, which is a merit-based hiring system. So probationary workers is essentially like, I think if you've worked there under 2 years, you have to hit 2 years to get out of your probation. So a lot of them were like, they've been there a year, semi-new hires. And then the rest were on this merit-based hiring system, which I couldn't find anything what the specific merits were, like what you had to perform in order to be kept, but their employment was not guaranteed. And so, not to like diminish the significance of the VA losing people, but it's important to know that these weren't like all full-time people who had been there 10 years, so they were like, you're gone overnight. There was a certain criteria, though again, I wish I could find out, like when like public companies have layoffs like Google or something, and they're like, we laid off 10,000 people, you can typically find like, we laid off 3,000 software coders. We laid off 50 janitors at this facility that were closing, and I would like to see that.
Yeah, I mean, the agencies involved on both sides, regardless of political affiliation, again, if they really care about veterans, why wouldn't they release that information so that we can know, hey, we're still going to be taken care of?
And another thing that popped into my head while writing this, because it took me, I don't go through these articles quickly. Like I read 6 articles and I wrote 1,000-page report, or 1,000-word report, which to some people might not be very long, but it took me probably 4 hours in total to read everything, digest it, like leave opinions out of it. Because I'm not saying either political party was correct. And I'll state my opinion at the end of what, as someone who uses the VA, what I think should have been done. But some notes I have here is, going back to the left getting so upset about this, 2 of the biggest veteran topics that I've found and that I've done plenty of research on and written articles is the 22 a day rate for veterans unaliving themselves, and the homelessness rate, which is somewhere between 35 to 40,000 per year. And these are 2 that I constantly see, right? And it's an average of 22. Like you'll see articles that say 17. The real number is it's somewhere between 17 and 25 because they're not always reported. So that's why we're sticking with 22. Where there is such an outcry, and all these politicians are getting upset about like crippling the VA care by laying off all these people, and it's going to have significant impacts, blah blah blah. There are already significant impacts. We have like 4,000 veterans a year taking their lives, and we have close to 40,000 veterans that are homeless. And then, we're getting upset because we're laying off 80,000 people, which, yes, technically those numbers I mentioned could go up due to the lack of staff. But for an agency that has almost $500 billion in funding, they're still not doing a good job, in my opinion, at all.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. When was it? It would have been 2016, mid-20s, when I went through filing for disability. I was lucky enough to be assigned a civilian doctor to do the evaluation. But, even with the efficiency of the civilian doctor in processing everything, that part was done very quickly. But then we went into a essentially 9-month holding period while the VA, evaluated everything. A licensed medical doctor did an analysis, put together all the proof and data, and handed it to them on a silver platter, and they still took 9 months to figure it out. And that's just one piece. I haven't personally had any experience with the VA as it relates to medical care for me personally, but I certainly have heard lots and lots of horror stories about wait times, people even dying because they couldn't get care in time, people who have had chronic issues that have progressively gotten worse and worse while they're waiting to be seen by anybody. And some of that may just be because people don't know what options they have. And I think that's something we want to bring to this channel, is to discuss some of these things and use our shared experiences to kind of explain that there are different options. You're not stuck in one lane doing one thing. And if you're not getting what you need, maybe you need to go a different direction. But the real crux of the matter is that the VA has historically been very inefficient and is still very inefficient. And the only way that these problems are really going to be solved is if somebody figures that out.
Yeah. And I talk to a lot of older veterans on my newsletter platform, Substack, where it's kind of like Twitter. You can like comments and then they can comment on your comments. But a lot of veterans are like, hey, the VA is way better than it used to be, like back in the early 80s and even 2000. And I'm not disputing that at all. I'm sure that every year the VA gets significantly better and more efficient in comparison. Like in the 80s, I'm sure it was garbage. I'm sure it was very, very bad. But I mean, just because something is slightly or significantly better doesn't mean that it's still good, right? You could have something still need a lot of work. And for example, right now, the average claim processing time is roughly 5 months, could be a little less, could be a little longer depending on the complexity, or, God forbid you don't check a box and then 5 months later you hear back, oh, you got to resubmit it with this box checked. It's going to be another 5 months, because those things happen. And that's why I went to a professional to do it, because with my luck, there were, who knows what would have happened. But I got really lucky when I got out. I had the same thing. Like on Fort Sill, there was like this private medical facility outside of base. And I went to a normal civilian doctor, and I didn't expect anything good to come of it, because I had heard horror stories of like, they don't care, it doesn't matter how bad you say something hurts, it's not going to get rated, whatever. And I fully expected it to at least take 1 year before I saw any money hit my bank account. I don't know what happened. I don't know if my injuries were so like cut and dry, like you had a Humvee accident, you went to sick call, said your shoulder hurt, they acknowledged your shoulder hurt, and then the VA doctor or the civilian doctor's like, yes, your shoulder hurts. And then that equates to money getting faster. But it took, I think I was out for like 3 or 4 months, and I was just at work one day, and I got a notification that this huge package was delivered to my house with like 300 pages from doctors. And they were like, boom, your rating's done. You'll receive money on the 1st. And I was like, sick. Sick.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of very similar to my experience. I went in thinking, I'm like, all these issues that I have, it's going to get, brushed under the rug, or they're going to say, oh, it's not really that serious. But like this doctor I had, he was the coolest guy. He was literally like coaching me through stuff. He'd be like, all right, now raise your arm up. Does it hurt there? Yeah. Okay. All right. Yep. Sounds good. And we went through every single sick call visit, everything on my medical record he went through, and then would conduct, physical tests, and he knew all of the requirements and the measurements. Because if you've ever gone and looked into it, there are details about how the VA decides on your rating, and it's an extremely long document and very specific. It comes down to a degree measurement for movement of joints, and based on, can you move your elbow 30 degrees, 40 degrees, that all ties into an actual percentage. So I was pleasantly surprised when I received a $1,000 deposit into my checking account for back pay, but I'm sure that's not been everyone's experience.
No, probably not. Some other notes I have from the article here. The current VA annual budget is $370 billion, which is a 9.8% increase from fiscal year 2024. So in 1 year, it went up basically 10%. And then that is a 5.4% increase from fiscal year 2023. So in 2 years, it's gone up almost 16%. And despite the increased budget, many veterans are forced to still use private sector doctors because of their locations, such as rural areas. So, for example, if I live in the third smallest state and I need to see an ENT or go get an MRI done, it's a 2-hour drive. If you live in a Midwestern state that is much larger, way more rural, I'm not going to name a state specifically, I don't want to offend somebody, but like it could take 4 hours to the nearest city to get an MRI. So that means you're driving 8 hours. Some people might not have that kind of time or money or vehicles that can go that distance. So you have to use private insurance. You have to use a normal civilian doctor. And the thing is not all civilian doctors will work with the VA. I wrote somewhere in my article here that many normal facilities don't want to work with the VA because of government red tape, and because there has been a history, I guess, with the VA taking forever to back pay these civilian doctors. So if you were an MD and you owned a facility, and not saying you don't want to help veterans, but if you take in 10 vet appointments per month and that equates to, I don't know, $3,000 of profit that your facility needs to pay the staff, and the VA has taken months to pay you back, why would you do it? You're hurting your own business, right? One of the individuals in this article said, like, we need to fix that system so that we can pay these doctors immediately so that vets can go to more than just select doctors in their network.
Yeah, I agree. You mentioned rural states. I live in California, which I don't think anyone would really consider to be a rural state per se, but it's a very large state. And, I live close enough to the capital, Sacramento, that there are facilities available. But California is very large. And if you live north or south by a certain amount, you're guaranteed to be driving 2 hours plus to get to a VA facility, let alone one that specializes in one specific thing like you were talking about earlier. You may have to drive 5-6 hours. So having the option to choose a private doctor that is close to you and convenient to you so that it doesn't disrupt your life or your job, that seems like a great thing to employ, in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know the specifics, obviously, but I'm assuming another reason that the VA wants you to go into their facility is because then they would have to cut a separate check to that doctor. Whereas if you're already going to like a all-included cost facility, then it's just included in whatever budget they have, opposed to if you see a doctor. I've seen the checks because the checks come to me, the bills, where it says like $2,000 to the ENT. The VA has to pay that, opposed to you just going to their ENT. Now, it does depend what percentage you have. I don't remember the specifics, but I think if you have over 50% disability, I believe the VA is completely free to you. If you have under it, I think there's certain, like you have to pay a certain percentage of the cost. Don't quote me on that. But that brings me to my next topic that, like, I don't want to say veterans should be taking advantage, but like the average veteran that I know can easily get a 50% disability rating. Knees and back alone, it's been proven. I've read countless articles that like the rucksacks we wore even though they look supportive, right? Like they had that little brace thing for the bottom of your spine. That was like a little comfy pouch thing. And it had like shoulder cushions. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, the stuff that we never used properly because
Right.
it was uncool to use the belt.
Yes, all those things like have been proven to put way too much pressure on your lower spine. I know airborne guys that were jumping out of planes whose knees were definitely messed up, who never to like sick call to get it claimed or anything. And if you don't do that and then you get out making 30%, you may not get everything free, which over the course of your life will be hundreds of thousands of dollars that you could save.
That brings up an interesting discussion point because I'm sure, well, no, I know for a fact that the period of time that we were both in, so you went in 2010, I got out 2016. During that 6-year period, it was frowned upon and you would be considered to being negligent or not doing your job or being a wimp, or however you want to word it. If you went to sick call because something hurt, that you're malingering. That was kind of the sentiment, so I don't know about you, but there were multiple times when I was like, man, my shoulder is really messed up or my knee is really messed up, but I don't want to go to sick call because then, I'm going to have retaliation come back on me, or I'm going to be, looked down on as someone who's, not up to standard, not up to par. So what happens in scenarios where, for instance, and this is a perfect real example, right now, I know for a fact that I need to have a reevaluation or submit a claim, a revised claim to address some of the other things that have developed over, the last 8-9 years. But I don't ever recall going to sick call for my knees specifically. How do you address a situation like that where that it came from the military, but you don't have any visits or military medical records to back that up necessarily?
You don't necessarily need documentation. A lot of things, I don't know how it works because the VA keeps changing it, but a lot of things can be considered like secondary, like this hurts because of that, or like maybe this didn't hurt in the Army while you were serving, but something else got injured. And because that was injured over the course of years, it led to an injury in a separate part of your body. For example, I had surgery on my left knee when I got out, something that I complained about multiple times while I was in, and I was called basically a bitch because my knee hurt, and they're like, no, it doesn't. And then I went to a civilian doctor and he was like, hey, dude, your knee's like really bad. We got to cut it open right now. And that happens, I'm sure, to so many people. But what happens is, how a doctor explained it to me was, so I injured my back because everybody injures their back. And then that put extra pressure on my knee because you're walking weird, right? Like the back and the hips and the knee, they're all connected. And I ended up walking weird. And then that put more pressure on my left knee to cause it to get injured and damaged quicker, needing surgery. And so then when you have surgery on one thing, you're putting more pressure on the other. So I put more pressure on my right knee for months, which then caused that to hurt more. And that doesn't happen to everybody, but I mean, that's just one example of how injuries can spiral. And, that we can leave the discussion of your units essentially not wanting you to go to sick call, which would eventually lead to you having evidence to get money from the VA in the future, for another conversation, because we could go on forever about that. And whether or not I think that's some kind of grand conspiracy to rob veterans.
I was going to say, I think I smell a conspiracy theory forming here.
Yeah, I mean, dude, it makes sense. There's no reason that your leadership would not want you to be 100% fixed and in the fight, unless they just don't like you and want you to be crippled so that they could kick you out or med board you or something. But anyway, moving on here, going back to these firings. So a total of 875 Veteran Affairs contracts have been affected by these budget cuts. Some examples of contracts being cut are support for assessing disability ratings. And then before we talk about that, I'm going to read the second part, and it's going to tie into one topic. Senator Tammy Duckworth, Democrat from Illinois, a retired Army National Guard lieutenant colonel, stated that individuals let go in these firings held frontline positions within the VA. Duckworth and her staff assisted 3 VA crisis line members to regain their positions. including a recently promoted supervisor. The individuals who had just been promoted was in probationary period due to their new role, which unfortunately made them eligible to be let go under mass firings. Someone high up in the VA, I don't remember who, said that none of these positions would affect VA benefits, medical care, disability ratings, like essentially the livelihood of vets. We know that that's been debunked just by this research. So 3 crisis line members, which if you don't know are the people you call, I think it's 988. 988, then press 1 if you're having like mental health issues or you're not feeling very stable. Or it's not just for veterans either. Your family or friends can call too if like they know a vet who's having issues. Granted, I don't know if it's just 3 of the 80,000, which yes, 3 is not a lot, but 3 crisis line members and then contracts for support of claims processing. I would definitely consider those frontline employees.
I mean, yes, obviously, I agree with that statement. However, I think we've seen historically that a lot of times things that are quotes by senators or quotes from different news outlets don't necessarily address all the facts. So, we don't know who these people are personally. We don't know what their job titles were. We don't know what they were doing on a day-to-day basis. So does it sound like there were critical services impacted? Yes, it does. But am I going to just take that at face value and assume that there's going to be some massive impact to these particular services? No, not necessarily. Not until, there's more specific details about what actually happened, what specific contracts were terminated and what volume of veterans they were assisting. Maybe these particular contracts were very inefficient ones, or it was determined that the people who held these contracts weren't holding up their end of the contract. Just don't know what the context is yet.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's very possible that like the 3 individuals from the crisis line were not good performers or whatever, but the 1 individual from the crisis line who got promoted, and because they technically are in a new position due to the promotion, they're in probationary status, so that's how they could be let go. So
that kind of ties back into my point, because there were only 3 positions that were overturned. That kind of leads me to believe that maybe the vast majority of these people who were laid off weren't doing essential things. But again, we have no way to know until we have more details on these specific things.
Those 3 individuals were already hired back. Somehow the senator was able to get them rehired. I don't know how that works, but I guess a greater concern is, so let's say hypothetically these were hard workers who had good metrics, right? If you're a VA employee or any federal employee, I just mentioned the VA specifically because it has to do with medical care, what is the incentive to work harder and want to grow within the VA or federal government if that means you could potentially lose your job by getting promoted? So would that lead to people not working as hard, people quiet quitting and just kind of coasting? Would that lead to like a greater atmosphere within the VA of people just doing very mediocre jobs? Because, hey, I can just do this for another 10 years and then get my federal pension and quit, opposed to, moving up, making 10,000 more next year, but then I could get fired, depending on who the president is.
Yeah, that's another valid point. I have a friend who works for the state government, and I happen to know that they work a total of maybe 5 hours a week, but get paid a handsome sum of money for doing basically nothing. And, I don't ever want to assume that that's what people are doing, but it seems like the way that certain government agencies are structured promote either underperforming because your next step would be to move into a position where you would have to do things that you don't necessarily want to do or enjoy doing. Or, like you said, you're just holding out until you hit your number of years in service so that you can collect a pension. That's not an appropriate way to motivate employees to do better and do more.
No. And the first part of this quote having to do with contracts supporting disability ratings. So I don't know if you know this, but a few years ago, because I think back then it was taking like 6 to 9 months on average to process claims. And yes, you will receive back pay. So like if you file January 1st for your back and it takes 9 months to be processed, you will receive pay going back to January 1st, which is great, right? But that doesn't help the veteran for those 9 months that they're like just hoping something goes through. And there's a large percentage that you'll be completely denied anyway for your claim. But they hired a bunch of outsourcing for claims ratings, which then shortened it to the 4 to 5 month time frame. And some of my concerns and concerns I've read from veterans is that these are not VA workers and they probably have no ties to like having military family members or like understanding the significance behind these injuries. So then you have someone who's outsourced. I don't know where they're outsourced to, America, another country. I don't know. But essentially doing your claims that would impact your medical care and compensation for the rest of your life. And there was some concern that like, do they really know what they're doing? Or are they just approving and denying things like willy-nilly and then you're out money and then it's not that easy. Like if your back claim gets denied, it's not as simple as just like doing it again. You have to appeal it. There's a whole process. It takes forever. So yes, we may have less outsourcing, but were these outsourcing individuals really the best answer?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. The industry that I'm in right now for my full-time job, we've been seeing a lot of outsourcing of particular parts of the process in constructing something outsourced to foreign countries. And in particular, when we reach the end of a job where something is being built or modified, there's a quality assurance process that takes place where there are very specific photos of certain parts of the build or certain pieces of equipment that have to be supplied to an upper echelon for them to review everything and make sure that everything was built properly, that it's connected properly, all of the engineering standards were followed. And outsourcing that creates scenarios where the people who are reviewing these things are essentially working off of a script with examples of what things are supposed to look like. But the problem with that is many times there are scenarios that are not cut and dried, or there are different standards applied based on the geographical location of where these projects are taking place. Because, for example, in San Francisco, it's a very moisture-heavy area. And so there are certain weatherproofing standards that are increased drastically to protect things from rusting or, becoming degraded because of oxidation or something like that. So could the exact same thing be happening by outsourcing something as complex as a disability rating? Absolutely. I could 100% see that happening. And it's even more nuanced than construction is.
Yeah. And there are some big differences in disability percentages. Like if you get originally approved for 40% and you realistically should probably have gotten approved for 70%, like someone made a mistake, someone viewed your claim on a Thursday who was less lenient than the person who should have been viewing it on a Friday. That is a massive chunk of money on a month-to-month basis, not even talking annually or like over 10 years, because it may be impossible for you to get that other 30% back. So like it could be really life impacting, especially like now where the job market is so bad that like having that extra tax-free money for veterans might mean the difference between being able to pay your mortgage or not being able to pay it. So like it's really important that these individuals are trained well and not just like in a massive warehouse facility just pumping out numbers to meet like your daily 30 claims documents metrics per day, right?
Yeah, because I can 100% see a scenario where someone is going, oh man, I've got to get through 20 more claims today and I've only got half of my shift left. I'm just going to start pencil whipping stuff so that it doesn't reflect poorly on my review or jeopardize my probationary position, because I'm sure that's got to be one of the metrics for these people is, how many claims did you process this week or month or day or however it's measured?
So I mentioned earlier, I would give my official opinion on all of this after all the research that I've done and writing this. My official opinion is there probably a ton of waste within the VA? Absolutely. I've seen it firsthand. I've walked up to departments where the 3 individual receptionists are just working while I'm standing there awkwardly, and then I have to do like a cough noise, right? Because they don't care. But I don't know how many of these 80,000 workers being let go maybe were fantastic workers. Maybe they were at year 18 of their 20 for their pension. Maybe they've been working there for 10 years and purposely worked there for 10 years, taking significant raise and bonus cuts because they wanted to make an impact. So what I would say is there waste, and should we find it and eventually get rid of it? Yes. Is privatized healthcare probably better and needs to be expanded on for the VA? Yes. Do I think we should have done it this quickly? No. Not for 83 million, which to us, 83 million is like we could retire and live, on a private island for the rest of our life. To the government, that's just the every Thursday shipment to some third world country. So should we maybe have slowed down a bit and not cut these 80,000 in the next 4 months? Yeah, let's just pump the brakes a little bit.
Yeah, I think I've got a very similar opinion of it. Do I think we should have just gone in and done a layoff in that size as quickly as it happened? No. But I'm also with you in that I also have experienced firsthand a lot of waste and redundancy within the VA. And I've certainly heard about it from other people. And we've all known for years that the VA has a lot of issues that need to be fixed. But, just going in and, axing a big chunk of people with a very, to your point, a very low ROI, if you will, return on investment, 83 million is a tiny, tiny number to the government. I think that a better way to go about doing something like this is tied into some of the other nuances that we discussed throughout this video, in that someone needs to go in and look at the departments more organically and determine, okay, where are the redundancies within the people who work for this specific department? And then maybe they get shuffled to an area that could use some additional help, where the skills of the people in one department could be used in another. And maybe there are people that are completely redundant, and that's unfortunate. But at the end of the day, we can't just hand out free jobs to people. Our taxes are paying for all these programs, and I don't want my money that gets taken out of my check every month to be thrown away, is what it comes down to. So I don't think we should have rushed into it. I think that there probably should have been some reductions or reorganizations, but this was probably not the smartest.
Yeah, we'll see. Like I said, I'm sure we'll mention this again in August, which is when these positions are supposed to be 100% let go. Who knows there's so much time for things to occur by then. Like I said, the federal judge in California already overturned a few thousand layoffs in February. This senator somehow got those 3 crisis line workers their jobs back. So I think the original 80,000 number is meant to scare people, and maybe the new administration just wants to show force by saying almost 100,000 workers are going to be let go, when realistically it could be half that, right? We don't know. I will say, if they let go all these workers and the quality of medical care offered by the VA crashes, it's going to look really bad on the current administration. What I will add for the PACT Act, which is what I meant to add, PACT Act's been in effect for almost 3 years, over 3 years. And I've been going to the VA since then, and not one person, so not the call center, not my primary care physician, I haven't gotten any letters in the mail that tell me, hey, you may be a candidate for something under the PACT Act. You may want to get checked out. You know who did mention it is when I went for shits and giggles to the other side of the state facility to a pulmonologist, and he was like, hey, what was your job in the Army? And I was like, oh, I was an MLRS. I worked on these massive 700 horsepower diesel vehicles. And he was like, you are probably a candidate for the PACT Act because you're not supposed to be spending hours next to these massive diesel vehicles breathing in those fumes. And when I was 19, I had no clue, right? I mean, obviously, like now it's common sense. You probably should be breathing in like gasoline and diesel and shit. But like our medics and our leadership were not like, hey, don't stand too close to that exhaust. It may have impacts 3 decades from now. You know, 1 million veterans have signed up since the PACT Act. The Biden administration increased 60,000 staff for the PACT Act. And I've been going there the whole time and nobody said anything except for this tech who mentioned it to me outside of our appointment when we were just shooting the shit. And he was like, oh yeah, diesel's not good to breathe in over years. So take that as you will.
So that's very interesting because, you know, I received multiple emails saying, you know, I think it was like April of 2023 was the cutoff for you to get retroactive pay for a PACT Act claim. But, you know, those emails, they listed off a bunch of things about, okay, these are the things that will qualify you for it. I don't recall anywhere in there mentioning a scenario like that. And my job, you know, we sat in a tracked metal shoe, for lack of a better description of this piece of garbage. And inside it, there was a heater that was somehow, I don't even know how it worked, but it had to have used diesel fuel that ran the engine. And when this thing fired up, there was the most distinct smell that you just knew was like, this isn't good, but I'm cold. You know, I'm freezing to death.
Yeah, dude. Like in the, you know, when you're that young, you're not thinking of health ramifications. You know, it's not like every time I put on my rucksack for a 10-mile battalion ruck, I was like, hey, my lower back could hurt in the future. Like when I took it off, I was like, ah, shit, my back hurts. But I wasn't like this, you know, I may have to see a PT for this.
Yeah, you're in the mindset of like, oh, wow, my back hurts. It'll be gone tomorrow though, or maybe the next day. It's not like, oh, I should probably figure out a better way to wear this thing so that when I'm 35, I'm not walking around like a person whose spine is fused together.
Anything else you want to add to this?
No, I don't think so.
All right. Well, in the description below the channel, I'm going to put the link to the newsletter. You can click it. It's going to have my actual article that I wrote. I'm also going to put the video in the article. You don't have to subscribe if you don't want to. You can just read it and not subscribe. And then you can also be a paid member. I think it's $5 per month if you sign up to be paid. That obviously is very appreciated as I spent 4 hours writing this thing and then we recorded it and edited it. But yeah, tune in for the next episode and thank you for joining.